I got itchy feet one time and left the beloved. I headed for Paris, but ended up in Mullingar. It was all because I knew too much, or thought I did. I knew who I was, and I knew where I was going in terms of my life journey, and I had decided it was time to leave Leitrim. Simple as that. It's important to see the world, I told myself. Going to seed in rural Ireland was not an option. So I presumed I was finished with the little cottage in the hills above Loch Allen, the home my beloved and I had set up 13 years earlier. But, of course, I was wrong. 5 years later, I returned. Knocking on the door, I said, "I'm sorry I ran away. Will you please let me in?" "But why?" she asked. "Did you go away?" "I don't know," I confessed. "Okay, so maybe I was worried that I hadn't seen enough of the world and thought I might begin another life in Paris or elsewhere, despite the fact that I was over 50. "Yes," she said. "And where did you get to?" "To Mullingar," I confessed. "So you didn't get very far at all, did you?" "No." After 5 years in Mullingar, I was on the flat of my back with a gigantic prostate, colitis, mental burnout, and tears filling my eyes. "Hold me," I begged her. "I'm a ruined man." And she did. And every day I sat up in bed, sipping a little soup and writing a few pages on the computer until I had a book finished, which was published and did very well and won a few prizes, and then suddenly I was out of the bed again, going around the country, talking to audiences about how little I knew about anything. It's amazing how consoling the general public finds it to meet someone who knows nothing. And I suppose what I now accept is that I most definitely know nothing. If I had used that insight as my guide on the road to life, like a route on the sat-nav, I wouldn't have gone down so many cul-de-sacs. Knowing things can be a big problem. It can lead a man astray. It's a delusion to think that you know it all. In fact, it may be a delusion to think you know anything. Although it's not easy to sustain a life based on knowing nothing. Okay, to admit you know nothing, especially when, like me, you're trying to write another book. I went to a psychotherapist about all this. She told me I needed meaning in my life. But I've been a Christian. I've tried Christianity, I said, and I've tried Buddhism. Neither of them seems to work for me. "And why did you leave your wife?" "I found marriage a bit boring," I replied. "And besides, she had a different view of how to fill a dishwasher." "And why did you go back?" "Because I was wrong about the dishwasher. And now I think maybe marriage does work." She didn't say anything. I suppose that's because she's a psychotherapist. And what I find most difficult of all is that being a man is wildly more complicated than it was in my father's time. Nowadays it's essential to be liked, and men want to be understood. they want to be held. They want to go to therapists, and they want to cry on television. Men are expected to be tender and human and loving, and to know when to hold their partner and when not to. I'm told that in the old days men spent their time in the fields making hay and had no feelings, and women were inside stirring pots of stew that later everyone ate at a bare board table on the flagstone floor in a kind of monastic silence, as they all inhabited the bliss of being a family. That must have been really peaceful. Everything was simple. A man knew where he stood. In daylight he wasn't unlike a horse, a thing that lived outside, only coming indoors late in the evening. He grunted over his soup, dozed by the fire, or smoked a pipe as his children grew up around him, and sometimes in the night he surprised his wife in silent love-making with the tenderness of a child. When I returned home, I was 60, and I hoped I might just have enough wit to be a competent lover by then, because more than anything else in the world, a man dreams of being in love. I certainly wouldn't like to imply that I'm a great romantic, but there was one phrase I kept coming back to when I was recovering from depression. Hold me. That's all I could say to my beloved. It was sad and pathetic, and I was embarrassed, but I said it over and over again, and she did it over and over again. She held me. If I were a romantic, I might have used other phrases. I might have used the kind of phrases James Bond uses, and I'd throw them at her because she's a beautiful person. I'd scatter them before her feet. But I didn't. Not when I was recovering. I was speechless most of the time when we were alone, and I discovered a man is not very attractive in striped pyjamas. In public or on stage it's different. I'm fine. I have no bother talking to 300 people and sharing my feelings. But when I'm alone in a room on a one-to-one basis, I get lost, dumbfounded. I can never find the right word, except for that phrase, hold me. And then, of course, there was the case of my poor mother, who lived so long and who, for so many years, had nobody to hold her at all. Well, that's what I was thinking on a bright May morning in 2014, 2 years after my mother had died. On that particular morning, my beloved was returning from Poland, where she had been for 6 weeks. I woke early. The room was still dark, but through the window I could see the sun's rays edging over the mountain. The sky was blue. The rain clouds had not yet gathered in from the ocean to cover Leitrim with that oppressive grey which makes humans in this part of the world feel so desolate and melancholic. A glass of water sat beside my iPhone on the headboard above my head. The curtain was half open, and my clothes were on the floor. I reached up to turn the phone on and listen to the morning news on BBC Radio 4. Then I got out of bed, using the phone as a lamp, and went to the bathroom. I had slept soundly through the night, and I relieved myself in a single and marvellous flow from my bladder, and felt an enormous sense of well-being. The reason for this sense of well-being was because in my early 50s I'd been going to the bathroom every 40 minutes, resulting from an enlarged prostate, and I was constantly walking around with the unpleasant sensation that my bladder was never empty. Then at 60, after a successful operation to reduce the size of my prostate, I became a new man. I became like one of those carven men I have always admired, the ones who can down 6 pints without leaving the high stool, and then go outside under the arch and piss with the ferocity of an officer's horse. I shaved, observing myself in the mirror, lathering my face, neck and cheeks with a green slimy gel, and then pulled the razor blade closely down each side, line by line, like a window cleaner, ensuring not to touch the small goatee that gave my chin some respectability. For years I'd never bothered shaving, so I wasn't good at it, and I only started wearing a goatee when I began visiting the therapist. I thought I might look more awake, or at least less mad, and more inclined to take the world seriously with a sharp little bush on my chin. The therapist raised her eyebrow. "And of course there's always something erotic about shaving," says I, because I always tried to dredge up something interesting for the therapist. She raised the other eyebrow, so I didn't pursue the topic. I was wearing some round-rimmed glasses I had bought in a chemist's earlier that day for €5. I thought they might enhance my goatee. I wanted to look like a psychiatrist. It was a kind of defense mechanism, I suppose. The sun had not yet risen fully over the ridge of the mountain, but the faint grey light in the sky was intensifying above Slieveneiren, and the trees in the garden were almost visible. I put on fresh underwear, clean socks and a tight-fitting shirt, with brown cord trousers, and had a look at myself in the mirror. The smell of chicken and onion wafted from a pot on the cooker in the kitchen. That will make the place feel homely when she arrives, I thought. I bought the chicken in Scollins of Drumshambo, a bright gala shop that combines a family supermarket with a butcher's counter and also provides hot dinners in a small restaurant at the front. For me and many others in Leitrim, it's a lifeline, a trading post, a kind of community centre. I'd brought the chicken home and put it in a pot with carrots, potatoes, onions, parsley and soup mix, and let it boil slowly on the cooker the previous evening. In the bathroom I splashed my neck with Boss because I needed to smell good. Who knows how ravenous we might be for each other by the time we got through a bottle of wine. I know men aren't very reliable in matters of sexual performance when they pass the age of 50, but it's amazing what a period of abstinence can achieve. I sucked in my stomach, powdered the underwear, and squirted more Boss on all sides. That morning, the beloved planned to fly from Modlin Airport in Warsaw at 9 a.m. and arrive in Dublin before noon. We intended to meet at the airport. Then we would drive home, and I would lift the lid off the pot, and she would see the amazing soup, with carrots and onions and potatoes and parsley floating on top, and a plump chicken sitting in the middle. And yet, I was sorry that the 6 weeks had come to an end. My solitary retreat was closed, our brief separation over. The soup was in the pot, the bird was well and truly cooked. I had everything prepared. I was trussed up as well as a pot-bellied old man of 60 can manage to truss himself, because I still harboured intense fantasies of an erotic nature and dreamed of fulfilling them with the lady wife when she returned and had washed down the chicken with a bottle of Bordeaux. I get excited when I've been alone for a while, and then suddenly the day of her return arrives, and I get an urge to hold her. Even though I usually just stand there at the airport like a gobdaw when she wheels her trolley through the arrivals gate after some of her travels, I say things like, "Well, how did you get on?" As if she had only been away for 20 minutes, looking for a particular book in the library. I want to hug and hold her, but sometimes I don't because it seems too emotional a risk in public. I am embarrassed to lash out all that girly feeling at the airport in front of so many men in visor jackets and peaked caps. What exactly do you think is girly about being emotional? My therapist wondered one day. I couldn't answer her. And when I thought again about airports, I had to admit that the arrivals lounges are usually stuffed with men happily flinging their emotions in all directions. Men with sunburned faces, short trousers, sandals and silly hats going way over the top emotionally, shouting their lovers' names, grabbing their wives by the buttocks, and pushing their uncouth tongues into their lovers' faces like they were in an adult movie. So what's so girly about showing emotions? The therapist repeated. Nothing, I admitted. Although in my neck of the woods, people are masters of emotional restraint. The conventional salutation in Leitrim among neighbours is a minimal nod of the head, and there are no lovers, just husbands, who after being parted from their wives for a very long time might just risk whispering in her ear something like, "So there you are." I can cook, but I rarely bother. In fact, I'm ashamed of all the meals I have failed to cook for the beloved over the years because I was too busy playing the flute or watching television or working on another book or renouncing the world in one of those self-absorbing private meditation sessions that used to isolate me in my studio for hours and sometimes years. I know there are men who serve their lovers steak in lean slices, blood raw, with fresh salads drenched in exotic oils, and other men who have a reputation for tossing a few things around in a wok for 3 minutes and dazzling their lovers with the aphrodisiac spontaneity of their noodles. But I never got beyond doing a chicken in the pot of soup the way my mother used to do it. The chicken bent over like a dead monk at prayer in a jungle swamp. I think many men are glad when their wives or lovers go away for a while. It allows them to play house on their own, to fantasize about what it would be like if they had remained unmarried. Being alone, they feel they have permission to surf the internet for hours and leave the bed unmade for weeks. And it's a serious thing to leave a man alone at any time. There's no telling what he'll get up to. Men catch ideas like an open mouth attracts flies. They worry about things. They arrange the furniture, and then they rearrange it. They make big decisions. They opt out of marriage. They plan affairs. They change jobs. They resign from the club. They drink beer, smoke dope, and watch football. They use their wives' toiletries in the bath and never clean up. In fact, it was when I was alone for a weekend that I once tried to shave my pubic hair in a fit of erotic passion after downing a bottle of wine while watching a programme on Sky about what young men do nowadays to enhance their sex lives. I lathered shaving cream all over the target area, and then, with a Wilkinson sword triple blade, scraped it all off, leaving myself tender and bald. It felt supersensitive. It reminded me of being a baby, but I anticipated vast increases of sensual pleasure during future orgasms. Or at least that's what the guy in the television program had claimed would happen. And it wasn't easily explaining the results to the beloved when she arrived home from a friend's funeral, and to be honest, it didn't even make any difference except that I got an ingrown hair, which created a boil of pus under the skin, and I had to go to the doctor a few months later. I remember one morning in the sauna gazing at a younger man whose chest was smooth, but whose legs were as hairy as a gorilla, and I suspected he may have shaved more than his chin. I was even tempted to inquire, there in the intimacy of the steam room, whether or not he had ever ventured between his legs with the razor, and if so, had he ever experienced any trouble with ingrown hairs. But discretion is the yardstick in the steam rooms of rural Ireland, so I decided to say nothing. I'm one of those men who likes to think he can survive without women, even though experience keeps telling me the opposite. I find a liberation in my own smell, the masculinity of a full sink, the nonchalance of dirty underwear piled on an armchair in the sitting room, and the kind of personal chaos that makes women doubt their own sanity for loving such savages, and makes women wonder if they were utterly mad the day they walked up the aisle of some church long ago in a big white meringue of silk and satin to pledge loyalty to a half-evolved Neanderthal with a fragrant penis. A solitary man in a house is an unfolding horror movie, like fungus in an unwashed cupboard, or the blue mould that grows in coffee cups that have been abandoned under chairs, or on the cistern in the toilet, or hidden on the windowsill behind unopened curtains and forgotten about until the morning of her return. Not that I was entirely delighted when my beloved told me she was going off to Poland, because I had become dependent on her. Even though she would only be gone for 6 weeks, I would now be forced to stand alone, something I had done rarely since June 2011, when I had suffered a physical and nervous breakdown. Apart from a few weekends here and there, or the fortnight she spent in London, I had rarely been so completely abandoned. Every so often, men get the urge to create sheds and special no-go areas like rooms to meditate in or rooms to work in. But all that insulation never solved anything for me. I have a little studio in the back garden, but I might only be there for 5 minutes, with an image of the Buddha, or a book about theatre, or a low whistle in the key of D, when suddenly I would be overwhelmed by the terror of being alone, and my desperate need for company, even if it was just to have a cup of tea with her. and then her presence would relieve me from all my morose introspection. I wouldn't have to worry about the meaning of life, or the bleak prospect of death, or any of the other great philosophical issues that prohibit me from washing dishes or making the bed, as long as I could worry about what she might want. When I told this to the therapist, she looked at me for a long time before saying that I wasn't unusual. Many men tend to orbit their loved ones like dysfunctional satellites, she said. They obsess about the woman in order to avoid examining their own lives. The minutiae of the partner's life becomes their agenda. When does she want dinner? How does she like her tea? What she prefers to watch on the television. All those things become a narrative that absorbs men beyond the scope of their own nostalgia. It's the only reason why some men remain married. They find it soothing. And it occurred to me that perhaps this was precisely why the beloved needed to go to Poland. She needed a break. She needed to get away from me. I may have been driving her mad. As a wise woman said to me one time, men spend the first half of their lives running away from women, and the second half running after them. One way or another, I encouraged her to go, and I was glad when she bought her plane ticket, because beneath everything else, I had a real sense of purpose about being alone for a long period. Not that long ago, depression had manifested in my life like my own private Dracula. I had spent months with him in the same room when I was ill, and now, 2 years later, he rarely looked in the window, although I suspected that he was still lurking somewhere at the end of the garden, and I was always afraid that if I was alone for a long period of time, he might just knock on the door again. And that fear made me dependent on other people for company. Although there is something in me that never stops craving solitude. So for 6 weeks in the spring of 2014, when she planned to be in Poland, I planned a journey to the interior. I was going on retreat. I would confront the unruly elephant of my own mind, and I would use the ropes of meditation, discipline, and single-pointed concentration to make that elephant sit down. At least that's what the various gurus on YouTube were suggesting. Depression is a lack of control, they said. You become filled with disturbing emotions, with anxiety, fear, or melancholy, and that drags you down. But if you can control the mind, the great elephant of consciousness, you can observe all those emotions coming and going, rising and falling, and you can watch them, hold them, and allow them to be. You can wait for them to evaporate like soft clouds evaporate into the sky, or let them rinse your body like clouds turning into rain. One way or another, you can bear them and quieten them until eventually your mind can become as calm as an elephant at ease with itself, or as clear as a blue sky. I wanted to stop going about the world like a blue-arsed fly, from one pile of dung to the next, utterly consumed with anxiety and occasionally possessed by Dracula. I wanted to be still and chilled and full of compassion for the universe. I wanted to be a blue sky. I wanted to be a calm elephant. I wanted to be what the wise ones in robes on YouTube said I could be. Surely that wasn't too much to ask. And if Dracula or any other personification of my anxieties knocked on the door, I would let them in and sit them down and gently accept them. I had read all the books on how to be compassionate with myself and how to find a mindful path out of depression and how to survive in the swamplands of the soul. And when she came home, I would make a great splash. I would give her a welcome. It would be like she was meeting a new man. I would feed her one of Mr. Scollen's finest chickens in a soup of fresh vegetables. Well, I wanted to read that this morning because I was in Glencolumkill for a week, and my beloved partner is gone away for a week. So when I came home this afternoon, after this beautiful week in Glencolumkill, where I was learning Irish, the house was empty. I don't know if you've ever gone round the house and found its emptiness affected you in a kind of a sad way, as if your life was a very short moment in time, and as if you hadn't even been aware of the place you had been living. So you look at it like a stranger. You walk around and you see books on the desk and you flick through them, or you look at a few cups on a shelf, or you look out and you see the grass growing and the trees, and it's like you're asking yourself, who lives here? I was doing that when I came home because I was so alone in the house when I arrived. Who lives here? And, you know, I've spent, I suppose, 20, 25, maybe 30 years, nearly 30 years now, in this beautiful place in the hills above Loch Allen. But all our lives, we live in spaces. And if we go away for a certain amount of time and we come back to them, there's a strange sense that we actually don't belong there. We can see it like as if somebody else was living there. And sometimes we can see it as if the person living there was living a sad life, a simple, innocent life, you know, obsessed with tiny things. I think that's one of the ways that we have a wisdom to see our own life. And coming home to a house that's empty can be a lovely practice of thinking about how short life is and how almost unimportant it is, you know. I mean, you see things that you're involved in when you're at home. You see, it might be a book that you're reading and it's just accidentally sitting on a coffee table, or it might be the television, you know. And you know the person who lives here really finds television valuable and enjoys watching the news in the evening, and look, there's the book that they were reading and they're halfway through it, and that's their life. And the lawnmower's down in the shed, and they love getting out in the lawnmower, and they think like it's fierce important to cut the grass, like you have to have the grass cut, like the place look well. And then there's all the little trees and bushes that you planted at different times in your life. And the whole thing is like you're looking in the window at somebody else's life and thinking, wow, it's a small little life, it's a simple little life. And that's how I felt. And it's like we don't want to do that. And that's why we feel uneasy when we ever come home to an empty house. You see, if the other person is there, if the beloved is there, there's a way that you kind of, as I said in that piece I read, you're like a satellite orbiting the beloved. And men can do that. I know that, I'm sure women can do it as well, I don't know, but men certainly can go into a state in life where they sort of almost obsess on being helpful, which in a way is maybe not helpful, you know. There's one of the things that a partner needs is for you to have your own life. Man or woman, you need your own life. And the more that you come from your own universe, your own space, then you come authentically to your partner. You become kind of, you know, joyfully saying, here I am. There's a lovely, I've referred to this before, but a lovely poster we used to have years ago in the 70s when I was young, and it was a kind of a gestalt therapy idea. I do my thing, you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations. You're not in this world to live up to mine. If we find each other, it's beautiful. If we don't, it can't be helped. Now, that last bit, if we don't, it can't be helped, feels a bit like, almost a bit like cynical, almost a bit like, well, I don't care anyway or something. Careless. But it's a kind of a necessary neutrality, I think, if you want to be surprised by your lover. The idea that you autonomously live your life, not that you're kind of fractured from your beloved, but that you're autonomous. And of course, one of the reasons why males tend to be satellites around their beloved and obsess about them and think about them and wonder about them, sometimes it can be a quietly destructive neurosis, that it's like it's like you're creating a kind of a litany of expectations that you have about how she does behave. And it can become a prison. You know, the obsession that starts as the lover being obsessed with the beloved. If the lover is not in himself autonomous in his life, then that obsession will become a cage for his partner, where he's constantly asking, where are you going? Who are you meeting? What time will you be back? When will you be boiling me egg? You know? That's an old-fashioned version of it, but I'm sure there's young versions of it as well. I mean, I do hear sometimes from young people, women having trouble with what they'd call the possessive male, you know. Can't let them go, wants to know why can I not meet you tomorrow, what are you doing, who are you going out to town with? And that kind of way that you chain up somebody else is very often to do with the fact that you're not living an authentic life yourself. I'm speaking from the male point of view, that's the only thing I know about, but I think that it's important for two people to have their own autonomy. And out of that autonomy, you engage with the other as other, and it's such a lovely thing to meet them. And sometimes you can put your partner or your beloved as the focus of your life, not for healthy reasons, but for the reason that you're not finding autonomy and authenticity as an individual in yourself. And then when you come home on your own and she's not there or he's not there, you come home and the place is empty. You can feel, oh, I don't like this, I hate being on my own, my mother used to say it, I hate coming home to an empty house. Now, my mother was talking about a different thing because she was talking about grief. She was talking about the situation where your beloved has passed away and that gap is left, that amputation has been done, that bit of you has been devastated and emptied. And so you're autonomous but autonomous in your grief. And so, like my mother, you come home to the empty house, you're coming home to your own grief. So that's a different thing. But I'm talking about it when, two people who are living together and then they love each other, then maybe they take each other for granted, then maybe he kind of gets this obsessive attention and it's like he wants to know what she's doing all the time, but in fact what's going on is that he's not really paying attention to his own autonomy. And there's the boy that can find it very uneasy to come home on his own. Which is why you'd find that male out in the pub all the time. Because the last person he wants to listen to is himself. Well, that's okay. But I would also say that there is a beautiful thing in males, in many men, where they actually deal with solitude in a creative way. And sometimes even more than women do. There's something, I do find men can be kind of more naturally alone or solitary. I'd see it often as men get older, how monastic they become. A bachelor or a man who's lost his beloved, sometimes you'll find that he's pared down life to fierce, simple things, He gets up out of bed and it's just, everything is simple. He uses minimum amount of clothes, minimum amount of shorts, simple way just to wash them, simple way just to have a little bit of food, Eat out maybe, that kind of, go to the local gala shop and get the lunch. Paring life down to sort of simplicity. You go into a house where there's a couple living together and there's a real fullness of all the ways that the house is dishevelled. You go into a house where a man is on his own. Funny enough, go into a house when a man is on his own as a young fella and the place is a complete bomb set. It's like a kind of chaos. It's like he's looking for himself. He's looking for himself and he can't find himself. He's looking under the furniture and everywhere. So the place is upside down. That's a young lad. But when the fella gets older and he's into his 50s and he happens to be living alone for a while, he can get very monastic. And sometimes he can discover a very strong sense of authenticity and autonomy within himself, being alone. And we see that in society, but it's like, for me, it makes intelligible a lot of monastic tradition that goes on or used to go on more frequently in Europe and in Asia, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatever, where males would find the cave, and they just live in the cave. Think about the guys in the desert in the 3rd, 4th century, 5th century, living in the cave. It's very simple. Hello. Good. Yeah. Good. Is all good with you? Okay. I'm gonna ring you about 40 minutes time. I'm just in the middle of our recording here. There's no bother. I'll talk to you at 7 o'clock. Okay. Bye bye. Now, men in the cave, 3rd century, 4th century, there's very little there. There's very simple ways to cook. I wonder, is that why men enjoy camping? I wonder, is that why they like fishing? Why do men go off and want to be on their own? And sometimes I would say that, in my experience anyway, it's the happiest of men that like that. And the most loving of men that like that. You know? There's men I've known, and they were kind of very solitary figures, and they enjoyed, very, very solitary adventures like fishing on their own or going walking on their own or whatever. And they were the men that I remember as being like very, very able to engage with their beloved partner or their children. It's really obvious to me in men, and that's probably just, as I say, because I don't know anything. I can only talk about men in this situation, but I know that men like that exist, and I also know that there's men who have no autonomy in the sense that they haven't deeply listened to who they are. And they're constantly uneasy. That, it's not just that they don't want to be on their own and they'll say, oh, I hate being on my own, and then they go out to the pub or they want company, and then when they get company, they're constantly arguing. And it's like, I imagine that there's no autonomy. There's no sense of what's inside. And I think that this all happened with me and came to a crisis in 2011, when I had a physical breakdown and then a mental breakdown. I think that was a kind of it was a total turning point in my life. And it was a point in my life where I was able to say, I may be on the wrong road, I need to get on the right road here. Now, it had happened once before. I mean, it had happened when I was 40, and when I felt, and I've spoken about this in another podcast, but I kind of felt there was anger in me, I felt there was a kind of a quiet back burner with anger bubbling away quietly. And I thought, why am I angry? And looking back on it, it was to do with the fact that I hadn't really got a full sense of my own autonomy and authenticity. I hadn't really looked inside to say, who am I? And so that's when I went off to Buddhism, and I did a lot of practice and got help from the Champa-Ling Centre over in West Cavan. And it was so enriching because it gave me a practice, a kind of a psychotherapy really, to examine my life and to pay attention. And that's the thing about meditation, that it's like paying attention. If people think, get rid of the metaphysics about religion, right? Get rid of all this sort of like gods and all that. Just think of religion, therapy, religion, same thing. It's a practice that may help you feel better in yourself. And the consistent thing that it's doing, meditation in any religion, is that it's inviting you to examine more deeply your own mind, your conscious mind. And to try and formulate some sense of identity, some sense of narrative that you're getting by looking within, rather than an identity that you get by looking outside. So you look outside and you imitate other people and you develop an identity. So I'm one of these guys. Be like me going to the Gaeltacht. Now I go to the Gaeltacht. So I've been in Glencolmcille there in Irish. So then I develop, I'm an Irish speaker. But there's something, that's okay. You develop an identity by, clubbing together in various groups and gangs and by imitation. But you also have this ability to go inside. And that's what I mean by autonomy. You can examine your own life. You can feel authentic, that you are finding what is it in me that is me. can face up to that rather than run away from it. And that can draw you into solitude. And that solitude can sometimes be not something that draws you away from your partner, but actually gives you a deeper capacity to embrace your partner or your beloved. And they don't even have to know that. They don't. Your partner doesn't have to be at the same level of self-reflection or prayerful meditation as you are. All you're doing is something that can, in a very healthy way, remain the deepest secret of your life. Your prayerfulness. The frequency with which you go into that secret room in the heart and examine by listening. What's in there? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you see? And my contention is that what happens in that room, that silence of the heart, is that those questions become: who is it that is looking at you and seeing you? Who is it that is speaking to you? Who is holding you? That's, I think, the journey of the heart. When those questions change. And it's no longer you saying, who am I? But it's something in the silence that is assuring you of your deepest self. Going out and finding something is no longer the journey. The journey becomes the experience and reception of something coming towards you. And in Islam they have that beautiful phrase, I used it last week, when I walk towards God, God runs towards me. So all that sense of presence that I go on about is to do with solitude in a practical way, and it's to do with the male, from my point of view, just from my point of view, it's to do with just, how men sometimes can have a propensity to be autonomous, a propensity to be simple, to be monastic, to be alone, and to fall into a rhythm of solitude. And that can be a beautiful thing, and that can be the very thing that kind of autonomy and solitude is not what pulls you away from a partner, but actually draws you closer, gives you more capacity to reach out and embrace and hold the one that you love. It's a very healthy dynamic. And then there is the guy who can't do that, and so he puts the beloved at the centre. He puts the partner, or she puts the partner at the centre. I'm only thinking of her. That kind of, we're going to the party and he's saying like, well, what time will we leave at? What time will we come back at? I'm only thinking of you. And at the surface, somebody might say, God, he's brilliant. He's the man to be married to. Jesus, he's always thinking about her. But you wonder then, is all that obsession unconsciously just putting her in a kind of a trap? She can't go anywhere without him. Like, oh, I care for you, but I care for you, does that mean I need you? I need you to be home at 6 o'clock because there's nobody else to boil me egg. I just wanted to share that. That's the introduction to a book, And, well, the book is called Hanging with the Elephant. I wrote it around that time, 2 years after my mother died. It's 8 years ago now, and that's volume 2 of the full memoir. And I have now finished writing volume 7, which is called All the Things That Are Left Unsaid, and it'll be published in October. And I'm looking forward to it, and I'll talk about it later. But today, because I came home from Glencolumcille, and it's such a lovely experience learning Irish for a week. It was so invigorating, to be in a classroom with people who, some of them, those 2 students, they'd be younger than me daughter, right? You're talking like 40 years younger than me. And it was very privileged and invigorating to be among them. It was also intimidating because they can learn so powerfully and quickly that it'd frighten you, My old brain is not so good, but I really enjoyed it. And then I came home, and as I said, the beloved is away at the moment for a week or so, and you come into the empty house, and you kind of, its emptiness kind of gives you a chill. It's like you want to leave it. You don't want to be looking at this thing. You think, God, it's a small little life. Whoever is the man living in this house and in this studio with all the dust and the shelves and the books that haven't been read and all the rest of it. You see, as I say, it's like, it always reminds me of going into a house where somebody has died. I know that's an awful chilling thing to say, but I think that's beneficial for me. It's very good to meditate on the shortness of life and to meditate on death. And to meditate on your own death. Like, let's be honest. If you contemplate your own death once a day, you will live an extraordinarily happy life. There's a simple piece of advice. And so, you come into where somebody has passed away and all their things are just where he left or where she left them. And there's a strange poignancy and sadness to see, maybe, a pair of headphones or a computer laptop in a corner. And you think they will never be used by that person again. Their life is over forever. Right? So when you walk into your own space and you see your own stuff just casually left around, and you've been away for long enough to feel you're almost like a different person, and you come back into it, and it's like, my goodness, life is short. You can see yourself from a different perspective, and that can be very beneficial. I found it enriching when I came back to that, and I thought this would be a lovely time to read the beginning of that book, which is about kind of, in a comedy way, I'm only trying to be funny in it in one sense, but it is about the kind of way that the men are completely mad and they obsess about women sometimes in ways that is not well, right? Because they're avoiding themselves. And I leave you with that thought. It's a loving thought, it's a celebratory thought, but men are completely mad. And pathway out of all that, everything from depression to mental delusion to whatever is the kind of way that your life has gone askew, pathway out of it is go into the room in your heart, sit with yourself, be with yourself, listen to yourself. Okay? Thank you for being here. Beautiful evening now. I think it's going to rain here in Ireland for Saturday and Sunday. We're hitting the 22nd of July. So I think there's going to be rain the next 2 days, but it's such a beautiful evening. Wherever you are, I hope you find a million blessings falling into your heart, by just sitting and being alone and being still and being here. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.